Hello everyone, I'd like to start. So, innovation, such a broadly used term. It's become sort of a holy grail for many of us. We're trying to create innovation in the various environments where we're at, creating a system of innovation that is scalable, repeatable in large organizations. They can be business, they can be government agencies, they can be municipal bodies. That's become a sort of a goal for many of us. My name is Achi Gvirtsman. I've been in the software industry for about 25 years now, different types of organizations, mostly large ones. Over the last 7 years, I've been running an innovation program within a large corporation and also mentoring several innovation programs in other organizations. What I'd like to talk to you about today is a system that I've developed, a system of principles, which I call the peak innovation principles, which I believe can turn any sort of organization into an innovation system that is not competing with the mainline business, but is cooperating with it in order to generate innovation for that organization. Now, I'm going to jump straight into the deep end of the pool with you and try to define what is innovation. Now, in order to avoid philosophical debates, this is my idea of innovation. When I talk today about innovation, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to create the next Merriam-Webster definition of innovation. To me, innovation is anything that impacts in a significant way key metrics of an organization through endeavors that have high levels of uncertainty and pose new and unfamiliar challenges to organizations. It's not about a suggestion box. It's not about small improvements, and it's not about stuff that is nice to have. It should impact strategic key metrics of the organization. It should be potentially in a significant way. Naturally, when you start with something with a very rough idea, you don't know if it's going to impact, but you need to aspire to get there. It needs to have high levels of uncertainty, because if you can create a Gantt chart and you'll stake your career on that Gantt chart, it's probably not innovation, because you know what's going to happen. It means that you feel confident that you're going to be successful. It's more or less what you've been doing in the past. And it means that it's not truly innovative, at least in my book. And it needs to pose new and unfamiliar challenges, because if I'm a construction engineer company, construction engineering, and I'm just building a new building, but I'm doing it a little differently in terms of the design, which I haven't done before, it's probably not innovation. It's just a way for me to make my service more appealing in an incremental way. A key that I will be repeating is that the main construct of the peak innovation principles is the innovation pipeline. There are different versions of this. I'm not committing to one specific version. The idea is you have a lot of ideas. Some of them go into a little bit of what I call incubation, which is some of people's time, some of the organization's time, but you haven't really committed to anything yet. Then we get to a funded experiment where the organization is committing some executive time, some funding, some real resources, but still not a lot, so that we can run a lot of them, and I'll be touching on this later. And then, if the experiment is successful, the organization decides to build. Notice that the number of elements in each phase decreases as we make progress. That's the key construct. This is what everything that I'm going to be talking about today is built on the assumption that we are going to create an innovation pipeline. We're going to manage it, we're going to run it, we're going to measure it. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is what I consider as the role of an innovation manager. Okay? An innovation manager is in charge of setting up a pipeline like this. So if day zero, I'm being anointed as the innovation manager of a corporation that doesn't have an innovation system or has some experiments been going on, but nothing substantial, and I'm requested to create the innovation system. The first thing that I need to do is to understand that I'm going to establish this. Naturally, if I'm starting from scratch, I'll be filling this up from left to right as months go by, but that's the main thing, the primary thing that I'm responsible for. I don't believe that an innovation manager is the chief innovator. It is not my role to come up with the best ideas. And I've seen innovation managers that are expected to be the chief innovators. To me, that's not a good idea. Simply because I believe that, as somebody shared earlier today, there's so much knowledge in the workforce and outside the organization that can benefit the organization in this stage of ideas, and in these stages of bringing people's experiences and backgrounds to the development of ideas, if I put myself and my team in a place here that says we know best, I'm competing with a lot of ideas that potentially can come from broader sources. And I think it also puts me in a position where it's very difficult to have that split where I can be both a chief innovator and a chief facilitator. It's very difficult because there's an inherent conflict between the two roles, and I also believe it's a different skill sets. So if I'm actually an executive and I'm looking for an innovation manager, I don't think I can find someone who has both skill sets that are at a high level, a level that's high enough to maintain something like this. So I would rather have a facilitator that's very good and bring the ideas from a broader audience. To me, in order to become innovative, organizations must innovate. It's kind of a tricky thing. It's like a circular sentence. But the thing is, it's not a chicken and an egg, and I'll explain why. Because the projects are the key. So I talked about the pipeline. But this pipeline has to be filled with projects. And to me, when I come to an organization that is your typical hierarchical, bureaucratic organization with its inherent processes and KPIs and ways of doing things, one of the things that it means is that if you try to innovate, it's going to be very difficult for you. And it's very easy for me to stand here in front of you, and some of you represent large organizations, and say you need to be more like Amazon, you need to be more like Google. It's very easy for me to say that. But the thing is that in order to become an innovative organization, you need to start doing something. And I like to use the analogy if somebody is 100 kilograms overweight and smokes a lot and doesn't exercise and wants to do an Ironman triathlon, I can stand here and lecture until I'm blue in the face. But what I would say to that person is, you see that door? Go out that door, walk to the end of the street, come back. Tomorrow, walk 2 streets. The next day, jog a little bit. You need to start doing things, because there are some things, a lot of things that you don't know until you know. Okay? You just need to act. Okay? And the projects are the key to this action. Because if you start implementing these projects, if you start turning ideas into incubation, into funded experiments, and into real projects, that, as you go along, as you implement the principles that I will talk about, that will give you the confidence to do more. It will give your executives and sponsors the appetite to ask for more, and you'll start generating success that breeds more success. The projects that flow through here, I talked about my definition of innovation. Look at the projects, the types of projects that we're looking for. There's a lack of clarity for these projects. When a project comes into an innovation pipeline, there's a lack of clarity which causes discomfort, and that's the main thing that kills innovation in large corporations. When somebody comes to you with an innovative idea, you will feel physical discomfort. Otherwise, it's probably not really innovative. Or you familiarize yourself with these sorts of projects and you don't feel uncomfortable anymore. You will feel uncomfortable. When somebody comes to you and say, I want to take a 30-year-old product and I want to sell big data capabilities through that product, you will feel very uncomfortable because big data is new technology, right? So we need to find a way to be able to contain these sorts of projects because there's a lot of questions around them. Technical questions. Can we actually build this? Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the expertise to actually implement something like this? Will it work? Should we, from a strategic standpoint? It can be a fantastic idea, but we as an organization are not the ones to build it. And then the market. Will we be able to deliver to customers who will be willing to buy in a sustainable and scalable way? I can sell 2 products. I'll still lose money. Can I make 1,000 deals? 5,000 deals? As an organization, can I do those things? If an idea is innovative, there is a lack of clarity when I say organizations will be asked to do things that they're not familiar with, that pose new challenges. These are usually around these questions. And so if we don't find a way that gradually allows an organization to digest, and when I say organization, it's mainly the decision makers who have access to resources and to funding. If we don't give them a way to gradually internalize such challenging and discomforting ideas and make them into something that we can build and sell, we will not have innovation. We might have islands of success, but again, I'm going for the big thing here. I'm going for a sustainable program that encompasses the entire organization, which I was able to build in my own organization and also foster the building in another large municipality here in Israel. So when we look at companies that withstood the test of time, there's a book that I recommend that's called Great by Choice. It's a business book. It's general. It's not just about innovation. One of the things that I took from it that I thought was very insightful was that the main reason for companies that over a span of 30 years did 10x better than their market, than their peers, one of the things that they identified as a key attribute was their ability to scale innovation. It's not about their creativity. It's not about their ability to create innovation festivals and ideation and hackathons. The ability to scale, it takes discipline. And everybody talks about the sexy part of innovation. But I want to tell you that the most difficult thing to do is not to solicit ideas. It is important, and I'll talk about it. But the ability to take these ideas and form them in a way that the organization can actually deliver and scale them, that's tough. That's one of the jobs of an innovation manager. Okay? So I'm going to be giving you these handouts. These are kind of self-evaluation forms. And I'll be talking about, so in the peak innovation principles, there are 9 principles. Naturally, I cannot talk about all of them in an hour and 15 minutes without making your heads spin. What I will do is I will focus on 3. And the important thing about these 3 is that when you want to launch an innovation program, as far as I'm concerned, if you handle those 3 properly, that's a great way to take off. You need to handle the rest if you want to scale, if you want to be sustainable, to withstand the test of time. If you want to launch, you want to take care of the first 6 to 12 months, these are the principles that you need to take care of. And as we go along, I will ask you to grade yourself, your current state in the organization, on this scale. So if I ask you about flow and you grade yourself at a 6, write a dot over here, okay? And at the end, we will have covered all of them, 3 more in depth, the other 6 a bit lightly. And I will ask you, if you want to have a discussion with me at the end, you can take a picture, send it to me by email, and then we can talk afterwards if you would like. So there are 3 layers of systematic innovation. Each one maps to 3 principles. The first one is the pipeline, which I described. There are 3 principles that you need to maintain in order for your pipeline to thrive. The second layer is a project. You need to maintain 3 principles that will take care of projects individually. You cannot assume that if something is launched, you can let it go. No way. These projects are still requiring attention for various reasons. And it requires your attention as innovation managers. There is a role for an innovation manager that is beyond the festivities. It's beyond the solicitation of ideas. There is a responsibility to maintain pipeline, to maintain projects, and also to take care of the environment. There's a very big difference if you're running a plant nursery and you're trying to raise new types of vegetables and fruit. It's a very different environment if you are working on the soil, on the quality of the soil and the quality of the fertilizer, and you water it, compared to if you just try to do it in an earth that is filled with salt. Your role is in the beginning to realize that yes, the earth is filled with salt, but I can start making small victories. And as time moves by, you need to work on the earth, on the quality of the ground, on the environment, because that will make your job easier. There's no way that we can, as single managers, or even with a small team, take care of everything all the time. At some point, you need the organization to work with you. In the beginning, when you launch, you have the ability to start generating success by the 3 principles that I will be focusing on. So, the first thing that I'm going to focus on is flow. The principle of flow. I like this quote: if you want to have good ideas, you must have many ideas. Most of them will be wrong, and what you have to learn is which ones to throw away. So the principle of flow handles these common issues, divides into quantity of ideas and quality of ideas. It's a very simple, that's the easiest one to explain. You have a pipeline. You want to have a prolific pipeline because you're talking about ideas that have high uncertainty, high levels of risk, lack of clarity. It means that in my system, out of 100 ideas that went into the pipeline, 1 reached realization. 99 were lost on the way. So you need to have a lot of ideas in order for enough of them to make it to the end and show outcomes and results. So first of all, there's an issue of quantity. You may have innovation teams that are chief innovators, right? You have all the PhDs in one room, and they're thinking about, prognosticator of prognosticators. They need to think about where the organization is headed, think about the next great ideas. I know that some organizations have these teams. These teams are great if they run their ideas through that pipeline. If they try to find shortcuts and they become the innovators and the guys or ladies that the organization looks up to bring them the next great thing, you limit the number of opportunities to be successful. There's also other issues that the organization rejects. Uberchuchems in Yiddish, right? Uberchuchems, a team of Uberchuchems, of these people who are considered smarter than everybody else. But guess what? Without the mechanisms of the ordinary people are running, you will not be able to deliver anything. And they will reject stuff that's coming up from above. Limited sources. You might have an organization that says, innovation will only come from engineering. Only from the R&D people. QA will not innovate. Support people will not innovate. I reject that. Innovation can come from anyone. The best ideas that I've experienced over the last 7 years, some of them came from people from geographies and from roles that I heard people who told me in the beginning, who gave me advice, don't go there. They'll only generate noise. That geography, that job title, they'll just create noise. I disagree. They'll create noise if you will let them. And that has to do with clear context, and I'll touch that in a minute. Slow pace. You start, and then you say, okay, we did one innovation event. We involved 250 people. We'll do the next one next year. No. You need to do this in a prolific way. You want a lot of ideas. Don't be afraid of a lot of ideas. You need to set up the mechanism that will be able to ingest, and that's another thing that you need to take care of. But it's not that difficult. You can start relatively small and pick up the pace. But don't be content with running one event and then saying, okay, I have ideas, I'm taking care of them now. You need to take care of what's coming next. Okay? So you need to have a lot of ideas, and you need quality. Right? So quality, if you think that innovation is invention, and there's a lot of organizations, especially high-tech organizations, that think that innovation is only based on inventions, on technology that is new. And I'm here to tell you that it's not necessarily so. Invention and technology serves innovation, but it's not innovation as a whole. Because if you take, for example, in some point in my career, I was working with a labs organization where you have researchers. They were contributing tremendously to my innovation program. But the thing that I discovered was that if I ask inventors, scientists, to come up with ideas, and I ask them what problem the idea solves, and they have research that is a solution to a problem that they're trying to solve, and we identify the problem, we validate it with customers, and then we come back and say, but there's a simpler way to solve the problem, the researcher is not interested anymore because they're interested in their invention. Now think in an organization that worships inventions. It's basically solutions looking for problems. You build a hammer and you look all around the world for nails, and you convince yourselves that there are nails out there waiting for this hammer, but it's not true. You're biased. So you need to find a way to harness invention, but not make it all about invention, because that will hurt the quality of the ideas in the sense that it's not a real world problem. It's just a hammer looking for nails. The system can be opaque. If the system is opaque, you don't cross-pollinate. You don't inspire people. If somebody submits a great idea and nobody sees it because it's limited, it's behind closed doors, it's something that decided in back rooms, and you don't communicate and you don't allow people to contribute, again, you are limiting the quality of your ideas and lack of clear context. If you want noise, ask people for innovation. You'll get a lot of noise. But if you start directing them, what is the purpose? We want new sources of revenue. We want significant improvements in the efficiency of our manufacturing processes. We want to significantly improve the quality of life in a large municipality, of the citizens of that municipality. Right? We want to make life less expensive for them to live in the city. That's a context of an innovation program, and you'll get ideas. And again, you'll still get noise, but then you'll be able to filter and say, this how does this contribute to the context of the program? If it doesn't contribute, then I'm not saying automatically reject it, but you have criteria where you can decide which ideas you want to receive and which you don't. So the solution is you need to have a transparent ideation platform, not just the online. There are a lot of tools that offer you online platforms, but it's not just that. You need to have a platform that is online, in person, and perpetual. It's always on. It's available online in some form. And it's also, there's a human touch to it. So we trained 100 innovation coaches in my organization. And those coaches were the face of the program for people all over the world because we have dozens of sites around the world. So the coaches were the in-person presence of the program. The online platform allowed people to easily communicate between geographies and between different types of jobs. And perpetual means that we don't tell somebody wait until next year. There's always a place for them to submit their ideas, because when somebody is ready to submit an idea, I don't want to turn them away, because chances are they won't come back again. The second part is the context, which we can do through challenges, specific challenges to the workforce, and through strategy. Because if we say we are an organization that innovates around big data, that directs the employees to come up with innovation ideas around big data. Now, I'm going to share with you 3 keys to success today that will surprise you, because they have to do with aspects of the role of an innovation manager that you did not expect. The first one, I want to start with a story. I met somebody who was a trainer for a system of product management that I took a course years ago, and he told a story that he was in Nokia, and he was having lunch with engineers at Nokia, and he put his iPhone on the table, and he noticed that some of them were moving uncomfortably in their seats because it was around the time that Apple was dethroning Nokia as the major vendor of that market. And one of the engineers told him, you know, we had the technology to build that before Apple did. And he said, why didn't you? And the answer was, nobody asked us. What an amazing answer. So my first key to success today is proactive solicitation of ideas from a variety of sources. You have to go after people and constantly nag them for ideas. Because if you think for a minute that the people in your organization are just sitting there and waiting for you to allow them to innovate, and they'll be running towards you happily, wanting to contribute their time and their effort to innovation projects, you couldn't be further from the truth. There might be a small percentage of these people, but it's very small. Most people will innovate if it's good for them. So you need to go after people. You need to persuade them that A, they will have the skill to innovate because you will give them the supporting framework, and B, that it's good for them and their careers to innovate. Because if they heard about failures in the past where people got chastised for failing when they took a risk, and they don't see their peers being successful innovating, which is your responsibility to communicate and tell success stories as part of what you do, they will not come. So you have to constantly chase them. What we used to do is we used to communicate 6 times a quarter. We would send, at the time we're about 16,000 employees worldwide, we would send an email 6 times a quarter to 16,000 people. Think about that for a second. And we would make those emails very compelling. We would break the visual language of corporate communication. Our subject lines, we would think about them very, we would give them a lot of thought, because think about the preview mode of Outlook. So you don't even get people browsing their emails. They will not see the end of your subject before shift deleting the message, which they do. So you need to grab their attention. We would use coaches to grab people's attention. They would do a pizza party and talk about ideas that were submitted. You need to think, I'm not saying that these are the only ways. I'm sharing examples, but this is your job. This is the innovation manager's job. You need to go after ideas. You need to look at the innovation program as a product. The employees are customers, and you're asking for their time instead of money. Bring a marketing person and unleash. Because there are techniques. There are books about marketing. There are marketing professionals. There's no secret here. You're trying to get ideas, and you're trying to get engagement. In our case, we wanted people to vote on ideas, and we wanted people to comment and volunteer to help their peers. and of course to submit their own ideas. But if you think about this for a second, if I come in and vote today, I'll be the one commenting tomorrow and the one submitting ideas the day after tomorrow. So there's a gradual level of bringing people into this system of innovation. Now, it might be a turnoff for some people, especially the people that don't want to deal with this sort of thing, because they want to be the chief innovators. They want to be, you know, the people who deal with the coolest ideas, work on the coolest technologies. That's fine. Those are the people who drive projects through the pipeline. The person who is in charge of the pipeline, that's what should interest that person. How do we solicit ideas of high quality and with large numbers to flow through the pipeline? How do I measure this? These are sort of vanity metrics, but they're early indicators. How many ideas are submitted? How many comments? How many unique voters? How many people viewed ideas? How many times were people viewing matches of a viewer and a viewed idea? Total time spent viewing ideas, and percentage of returning customers. If somebody voted today, what is the probability that they will do something with a higher level of commitment in the next cycle? Okay? So you can actually measure these things, and they're indicators to your success. Yes, it's not yet the revenue dollars that your ideas generated eventually, but it's early indicators of success, because if you have quality ideas at the front end of the funnel, you will get success at the end of the funnel. That's one of the key factors. So the summary: you develop a transparent ideation environment that's always on, invites varied audiences to submit ideas, comments, and contribute. You invite everybody. Don't limit this. I implore you. Don't limit the audience that can participate. You will be amazed at what you will get from the people who you don't think can participate, even if they live in strange time zones. Create a context for ideas and communicate it clearly and regularly. The fact that you created the context doesn't mean that everybody knows that it's there. You need to communicate all the time. And the fact that you communicated it last month doesn't mean that people remember. You need to find ways to constantly nag people and remind them what you want them to do, and have a clear call to action all the time. We would actually, one of the interesting things, we would nag people, as I call it, the email, and we would measure, we would look at, through Google Analytics, we would look at the activity on our online forum. And the graph looked like this. And every time you see this, there was an email message or there was an event. Valerie was part of my team, right? You saw, I mean, it was amazing. And we kept asking ourselves, how can we raise the bottom part so that when people are idle, it's a higher level of activity? And we found clever ways that had to do with the local presence of innovation coaches and so on. But my point to you is, you cannot assume that people will just come. Again, it's a product, and the employees are your customers. Proactively solicit action. So I would like you now to grade yourselves on the flow, your current state of the organization. Okay, so just mark your grade on the flow. Okay, you see the flow, it's the one on the top. So you just, if you say 5, 6, find your, from the center to that principle, to flow, and just mark it. And I want to ask, has anybody graded him or herself higher than a 7? Higher than 5? Higher than 5?
No.
Okay. People are afraid. Don't be afraid. Can anybody tell me of one thing that is good today in their organization about the principle of flow? Even if the total grade is low. Yes? Inclusion. You invite ideas from everyone. Excellent. Anybody else want to share? Does anybody want to share a challenge that they have today around this principle of flow? Nagging? You don't nag enough. Anybody else? We will need more student participation in the following principles. I can't go to the same person all the time. So I have to tell you that if you decide to launch, that's where the low-hanging fruit lie. It's pretty simple. Yes?
your specific business
Yes.
challenges. You said that you want ideas all the time. So do you have specific challenges at a set time, or do you have like an open, random ideas?
So what I would do, I tried not to structure it too much because I don't want to limit people's willingness to engage. If I have an idea about Internet of Things, but right now the theme is big data, I still would like that person to submit their idea and I would like to give them a chance to be successful. I would create themes. I wouldn't constrict the submission of ideas. So it's always open. You can submit whatever you want, but we do like a pre-filtering. If it's not related to our highest goals, if somebody, for example, says we need to do Kalinetics in the coffee corners every morning, why? Because it will make the employees higher energy in the morning and healthier. That's important, but that's not the purpose of our innovation pipeline because we defined that we want new sources of revenue. And if we don't see a relationship, we don't say no. We come back to the innovator, we ask, is this potentially going to directly contribute to our revenue streams? If the innovator cannot come up with an answer, if it's an internal improvement sort of an idea, then we say you need to find another place. But if it connects to our highest level goal, then we accept it even if the theme right now is different than the theme of the idea.
And the nagging that you do on an ongoing basis,
Yes.
to tell them come up with ideas, or it's specific?
When we nag, then it should be a themed sort of nag, but it's open for everything. So we make it clear that, yes, we will welcome every idea, but we want our focus right now on big data related ideas, for example, or Internet of Things related related ideas. The next principle is under the layer of project. Okay, so there are 3 principles for project. I'm going to focus on experimentation. And I love this quote by Mike Tyson, because that's what happens with innovation projects. Innovation projects have a very nice idea of where they're going. When they take their first step, they get punched in the face. And the experimentation principle is about understanding that in advance, anticipating it, and setting the right expectations and the right processes around it that will be able to contain that change. Because as corporations and large organizations, if you go through the project management tools and disciplines that are implemented, what you will discover is that as soon as something receives even an initial level of approval, you have a Gantt chart and you have milestones, and they're usually around execution and building. And you want to change the mindset and say, progress is not about building, progress is about learning. Because when you build something, you're assuming that you know what you want to build and that you will be successful in selling it in a scalable and sustainable way. But now we have to realize that we don't. Because of the questions that I asked earlier, right? Technically, can we build it? From a market perspective, can we scale it? From a strategic perspective, should it be us that build it? We will not know until we start moving. That's why I personally don't attribute a lot of value to expert committees that look at ideas at their very initial stages. Because the expert committees usually consist of people that brought us where we are right now. But we want to find the new products and new ideas that will take us to the future. So I look at the experts as the technical experts. They will tell me what is feasible from a technical perspective, but they will not tell me, should we build it? They will not tell me, I think customers will not pay for it. No. I'm going to go out to the field and I'm going to collect information as an experiment. And that's the key, an understanding of the principle of experiment. Because
But how do you filter ideas?
how do I?
Filter, I mean, it's a pipeline, right? You have
Yes.
ideas. So who filters if not an expert committee, or who sits on that committee that filters?
So I actually, so I'm moving a little bit to the principle of selection. I'll just touch on it very briefly. We let the data do the talking instead of opinions, right? So experimentation and selection principles have a lot in common. The experimentation principle says I have a project. I realize that until I get to later stages, it's an experiment. It's not a product. It's not a thing that I'm building yet. It's an experiment that I'm running. I'm building stuff as I'm experimenting, but it's not about the building, it's about the learning. When I realize that, I understand that the initial filtering from, let's say, 100 ideas to 20 can be crowdsourced. That's what we did. We would invite people to vote, and we would trust the voting process to bring us the most promising ideas. And then we would give them some time to go out to the field and do basic validation of some key questions of their projects. And they would come back with findings. And then when they pitch to decision makers, they don't pitch, I think that we should do this. Because then the executive would say, well, I don't think so. And that's the end of the game. They would come with something that the executives do not know. That gives them power, and that gives them more confidence that what they're suggesting, that their experiment is going to be successful. So the second stage of incubation, for me, is data collection and a little bit of maybe prototyping or mock-upping. Not more than that, because I just want to understand, is this idea worth some organizational resources beyond time and a little bit of fact-finding? The common issues here are, when we don't do this properly, we make big bets, right? Because in the lack of this approach that says this is an experiment, it means that like in a reality show, like the Sharks, right? The Shark Tank, I as an executive need to be able to sit in front of, let's say, after somebody, a committee, narrowed it down to 10, I need to sit in 10 presentations and channel the inner Steve Jobs that I have and sit there and say, this one will be successful, this one will not, because I have a budget for 3. But if I look at it as an experiment, I can try all 10 and then make a better decision later on based on their findings, instead of gambling and making big bets, a small number of big bets. Another syndrome is focusing on the how instead of the why. Again, especially when it's engineering organizations, technological organizations. We love our technology. We love to build stuff. And you ask engineers to come up with innovation ideas, they'll come to you with hammers. And that's great, it's a great start, but you need somebody to sit in the room and tell them, wait, this is a hammer. Are there nails out there? Find nails, and then come back with a better hammer that we can actually sell. We need to focus on the why, not on the how. Myopic thinking. Again, you go to a labs organization, you'll have scientists, they want to push their research. You go to engineers, they want to build stuff. You go to sales, they want to close a deal with 2 customers. But I want to close deals with 100, and not just this salesperson, but all of my sales force. So we need to expand the vision. Another thing which is really interesting is if there's an innovation program and I know that I'm going to pitch to the CEO, I cannot come to the CEO with a small idea. Even if the small idea can grow later on, if I come to the CEO with something that the impact is very minor, then the CEO will tell me, well, that's very nice, but it's not really going to make a dent in our bottom line. So I expand and I come up with platforms and I come up with these grand visions of things that are going to change the business and disrupt the marketplace, and that becomes the idea. And then it becomes a Gantt chart. And what I'm saying is, instead of that, if we look at it as an experiment, and I can say, you know what? In the future, the vision, I'm going to create this amazing platform. But right now, I'm pitching the killer app. I don't need a platform yet. Let me build one app. Then I'll build a second app. And if these 2 apps are successful, then we build and sell a platform as a company. But let me take the first step. And then this is an experiment, and it's not a big bet. And if we create a culture and an environment where an employee can come and pitch something that is small, that will not make a big dent by itself, but it's a first step on the road to a grand vision that can be successful, then we change the quality of the pipeline. We change the quality of the innovation. Another one is that learning isn't considered progress. I touched on that. So if I come to a checkpoint meeting with an executive and he asks, okay, so 3 months ago I told you to go ahead. What have you achieved since then? And the answer is, yeah, well, we interviewed 20 customers and we showed them a printout version of what the report is going to look like. He would kick them out of the room. But that's what it should look like. It shouldn't be about we created a prototype, because it's probable that if we're a software company, we can generate these reports. But whether these reports are valuable enough that the customer tells me this is worth a lot of money to me and I will pay you for this, that's a very big difference. And I posit to you that this is what you should do first, before you build. Because then your failure will be fast and cheap, instead of these grand failures that traumatize an organization for years afterwards. So the solution is something I touched on. Lean startup is actually a methodology that I feel very comfortable with, but there are other methodologies. It doesn't have to be lean startup, but it's a methodology. It has to be a methodology that is about experimentation, learning, and pivoting, right? And correcting course. And you need to educate the organization of the benefits that this has for them. And I'll explain what the benefit is. And that is key to success number 2. As an innovation manager, you need to understand that it is your job to lower the cost of a business experiment. Because the default right now is that the manager looks at an idea, and if you tell them it's an experiment, what they understand from what you're saying is, yes, we will build this, experiment if it works, and if it fails, I'm screwed. I want you to think about the executive you're trying to persuade to launch an innovation program. Think about the executive who's going to sponsor the innovation program. How do we make it safe for them to take the first step? And my answer to you is key success number 2. Lower the cost of a business experiment and communicate to the decision maker that it is what you're doing, because it is the key. It's a linchpin. If you lower the cost of an experiment, the organization can execute more experiments per year, and it fosters executive confidence, because if all I do is run 2 experiments a year, yeah, it's nice, but the organization does 100 different things. If I run 20 experiments a year, and I keep a status report, and the executive sees progress and understands what learning means, that's a completely different ballgame. Think about your position as an innovation manager in the eyes of that executive at the end of the year. If you ran 20 experiments, and some failed and some did not, but there was learning, and you documented the learning, you shared the learning, you communicated the learning to the executive and to that executive's peers. Failures are less painful and can become part of a sustainable system. 100 ideas, 1 reaches realization. 99 failures, and I want to tell you something. I received thank you notes from failed innovators. Excited, emotional thank you notes of the personal journey that they went through. That's another aspect of the innovation program that I'm not going to deep dive in today, but think about this. Every innovator that is brave enough to participate in the program has to walk away feeling bigger than they were when they entered, regardless of how little they did. That's another responsibility of yours, but let's go back to this. The quality of decision making can become a legitimate goal. You're telling the executives, look, I don't expect you to be fortune tellers. I'm handing you this system that will improve your decision making. It will improve the correct decisions that you will make, because instead of a small number of big bets, you're making a larger number of educated guesses, and in the end, what you decide to invest in is based on facts. And yes, of course it can fail. It's still a high-risk project, but the risk is significantly lower. And you chose much better, you made much better choices because of this experimentation principle. Educated guesses instead of big bets. And ideas with a grand vision can begin with a focused experiment. So as I said before, if I lower the cost of an experiment, and we understand there's an experiment and there's a vision, we will start with 1 step, and if we were successful, eventually we will reach the vision. And some executives can say, this is too slow for me. Why aren't we aiming for the sky? It's hard to argue with that. If an executive is willing to make a big bet, and if they fail in a spectacular way, it's their right. My job as an innovation manager is to advise them heavily against it. Because in my career, I've seen a lot of big bets, and I've seen the results of big bets. And as I said, one of our goals here is to create something that executives can actually sponsor. Because when you step in front of an executive and you say, you know, remember that innovation thing? I want to set up an innovation system. Do you think that the first thought that goes through their heads is, yes, an innovation system. I love it. It's wonderful. Let's do it. The first thing that goes through their minds is, oh boy, how much is this going to cost me?
It's going to hurt.
Yes. And the thing I love about this approach, this pipeline approach where we lower the cost of an experiment, is you tell them it will cost you as much as you're willing to invest. You give me X, and I tell you how many experiments you will run a year with X. And the ones that you will want to invest in, I don't worry about those, because when you will see what comes up in the later stages, you will want to invest in them because you will see the ROI. I will show you the ROI for these projects. But what I'm asking you to fund right now is the pipeline. And give me whatever budget you want. I will run the experiments that will fit into the budget. And you can have more, and you can have less. You can put your foot down on the throttle, or you can push the brakes if you want. You have full control. Executives love control. That's what they learned, they studied in their MBA. They want control. So the trick here is to run this environment that has so much uncertainty, but somehow frame it in a way that it gives the executives the control. And as you see, what happens is the pipeline has projects that have a risk that is reduced, and the investment can increase, and the total number of such projects is reduced as a result. So we can control the pipeline's total cost. If you understand that, and if you can articulate that to decision makers, you have much better chances of getting an innovation system funded and you given the responsibility of running it. Because you look at the pipeline as a construct that has a price tag on it. And you understand that you can manage to budget. If you have an executive that just wants to splurge, I congratulate you. Your life will be much easier, actually. But most of the time, it's not like that. We need to manage to budget, and this gives you this format. This system allows you to manage to budget. So once again, I ask you to mark the experimentation principle on your charts. I'll give you 30 seconds. And before I ask you about your grades, I want to touch on Lean Startup a little bit and on the concept of an MVP. So sometimes I encounter people that tell me, yeah, we do experiments. And then when I dive a little deeper and I say, okay, so what do you do? Well, we get an idea submitted, and if it passes the first step, we build a POC. POC. POC and MVP are not the same thing. Please remember that. POC is proof of concept. It's proving that you can build something. I assume that we can build, especially in software industry. If it's code, you can probably write it. But the thing is, an MVP is a minimum viable product, and it's about, if we build it, will anybody care? So I'm working with a large government organization today, and one of their ideas is when a customer files, let's call it an incident, and it takes a few days to handle the incident, they want to send text messages to the customer, which is a citizen in our country, about the progress of handling that incident. What is the MVP? The MVP is having a single agency that organization has a lot of agencies around the country. We'll pick one. We'll ask the person who's doing that shift during the week to send text messages manually to customers for sampling of the incidents, and then survey their level of satisfaction with the service that they got and compare it to people who did not get text messages. That's an MVP. An MVP is not asking, can we now get a system that sends us text messages automatically, set it up in our IT environment, and create a limited experiment that sends text messages automatically. That's a POC. That's not an MVP. And it will take longer. It will cost a lot more. And I can tell you from experience that the IT organization will tell you, we're not going to take all this time and effort to bring in a text messaging system just for your little test. It's not worth our time. That's the key. You're familiar with Groupon? So Groupon, what was their MVP? Does anybody know? So Groupon started around the use case of pizza. If 10 people want to buy pizza, they'll get it at a very low price. They created a website, and they had a person sitting in the office, logging people's requests for pizzas, calling, and ordering the pizzas for them. That was their MVP. No back-end system. That's what you need to internalize. Because if you do it this way, the funded experiment is where we do the MVP. It becomes much cheaper. and you can run a lot of them. This is called Lean Canvas. I really encourage you to educate yourselves if you're interested in innovation management. Educate yourselves about Lean Startup. I recommend, so first of all, there's the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. That's kind of the high-level methodology, the seminal work, really highly recommended. If you want to have a practitioner's guide, read Running Lean by Ash Maurya. If you look on YouTube, Lean Canvas in 20 minutes, the author, Ash, does a fantastic job of explaining this tool in 20 minutes. It's an amazing tool. Anyone with an idea can work on this with somebody who understands it a little bit, and within 90 minutes, have a business model on one page. What do we do traditionally? We create a 100-page write-only document. It's called, I don't know, product strategy, product spec, I don't know, every organization has their own word. Just to make sure that somebody wrote the document. We don't actually read it afterwards. This we read, and this we can iterate on, because it takes an executive exactly 30 seconds to read this and understand what is this project about once the language is implemented in the organization. Some of the KPIs: how many experiments can you execute annually? Are innovation projects currently governed by standard tools of project management? I want you to think of a failed innovation project. How was it perceived? And is decision-making around innovation based on opinion, politics, or does it have a sound foundation of experiment-based data? Okay? So now, did anybody score higher than 7? I'm sorry, it's not meant to bum you out. I just want you to understand that in order to create an innovation system, there are basic things that you need to do. And this is the second principle, and I'm telling you, if you don't implement this at least at a 7, then please don't try. Because it's going to be painful if you try and fail. You need to have a flow in the pipeline, you need to start implementing the experimentation principle, and the next one, which is leadership. And that's our third and final principle for today. And that relates to the environment. So this is a quote by Jack Welch. Before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And a great aspect of the innovation program is it really grows people. It grows the workforce. People develop new skills and new confidence as they work through the innovation program. The leadership aspect of an innovation program usually suffers around, first of all, top-down. So managers see a high perceived cost, but a lack of clear benefit of projects. As I said before, oh God, how much is this going to cost me? So they don't take this seriously. Because they say, what? This guy is going to come to me with the idea that's going to make our next great revenue stream? I have my experts. My experts should come to me with ideas. So if we don't create an environment that avoids this, perceiving this is going to cost me a lot of money, and it's not going to make a lot of impact, the innovation program will not be taken seriously, and so will the projects. A lack of patience for outcomes. One of our jobs is to educate that this takes time. Somebody said earlier today in one of the sessions that innovation is a long distance run. It is not a sprint. You have to understand that you're going into a process that will take several years to get to full fruition. Not to outcomes. Outcomes you can see very quickly if you're doing it right. But the full fruition takes a few years. So managers need to understand that successful startups take years. Why would an internal project take less to grow to $50 million a year? There are ways to make certain shortcuts, but still, the concept needs to materialize. It takes time. There's an inconsistency in style and decision-making methods across the org. So if I go to executive A, he expects certain things. I go to executive B, has a completely different style. So now innovators need to somehow adapt themselves. And my approach is we need to create a uniform language. We need to create some sort of a contract between us and the executives where we understand how we present innovative ideas and create a branded environment. I'll touch that in a minute. When we pitch an innovation idea, it's completely different than when we pitch a process improvement or when we pitch the next release of an existing product. It's a different set of tools and it's a different language, so we can uniform this. And the last one, which is really critical, is there's no senior sponsor. When I launched 7 years ago, I got a senior sponsor. And the senior sponsor told me, the first time I pitched and I started going into all the technicals, he told me, Achi, listen, I want you to create an innovation program that we can be proud of as a company. I want universities and I want other companies to come and see how we innovate. So it did not just inspire me to do more than I actually planned 7 years ago. He backed me up. He got me budget. He got roadblocks removed. And he communicated my successes to his peers and made sure that I got visibility. Without a senior sponsor, don't even try. Really, it's a difficult exercise. By the way, it's amazing. It's an incredible adventure. I highly recommend being innovation manager. I truly do, sincerely. But you need to take the first step with the right things in place to increase your chances of success because it's your careers. Bottom-up issues, speaker status. If I'm an employee and I do a TED talk to my manager and I say, you know, I think that we've been selling cups. We should go into the bottle business because I think so. Look at what Gartner says. And the manager looks at him and says, well, I think different. End of discussion, right? So we need to create a language where the managers can understand what employees are pitching. Terminology gap. Executives speak in executive lingo. They look for things with exotic names like ROI and gross margins and ask the engineer from Netanya if he knows what gross margin means. You need to coach them. You need to teach them what to talk about. And there's over-reliance on employee persuasion skills. We have this myth that if an employee has enough passion and enough drive, they will persuade managers to do things. And you know what? Sometimes they do. But the outcome is not a good one because we focused on form instead of substance. If we got an executive to approve something just because the presentation was great, shame on that executive and poor entrepreneur, the pain that they're going to suffer as a result. I like the story of Daedalus and Icarus. If you're familiar, it's a master craftsman. It's from Greek mythology. He was jailed in a tower. And in order to escape, he was very resourceful and he tempted birds to come to the tower. And he would kill the birds, take their feathers, and using candle wax, he constructed wings for himself and for his son. They were both jailed together. So they jumped to their freedom and they flew. But he warned his son not to fly too close to the sun because the heat from the sun will melt the wax on the wings. His son, being a young man, didn't listen to his dad, just like my 3 boys don't listen to me sometimes. But this had tragic results because the son fell to his death in the Aegean Sea. And I like to say that if you allow employees to present ideas to managers without your involvement, it's like flying too close to the sun with wings that are made from feathers and wax. Okay? You need to have control as innovation managers on every opportunity where an innovator meets a manager. And to me, that's the key, number 3, to success. So there are 3 main points in time where I think the interaction with managers is critical and should be managed. The first one, should we invest in a funded experiment? Somebody had an idea. They filled a lean canvas. They went and interviewed a handful of customers because we gave them a little bit of time. In my organization, 10% of their time for 3 calendar months. Again, notice what I did. I want to create something that managers feel is under control. Because when I explain to them that we will not run more than 15 incubations at any given moment, and every incubation has maybe 3 or 4 volunteers, and they're given 10% of their time for 3 calendar months, they understand that there's a limit to the potential waste of this step. And it's much, much more probable that they will approve this and will support it. So when we finish this, we present this to decision makers and we ask them, should we do a funded experiment? And if they say yes, then we tell them, okay, if you are the executive who is going to make the decision on whether we should build it or not, I want you to work with the team during the funded experiment stage and tell them what they need to do to get an A+. You tell them, if you convince me A, B, C, I will fund it and build it. Decision point number 1, decision point number 2, and this period of time where I just ask them, sit with the team 30 minutes every 3 months. How much time can that consume from an executive's agenda? And if they're excited about their idea, they'll invest time. And if they're not excited enough to invest time or send somebody they trust, why even do the funded experiment? Why bother? The other one is to communicate the activity that's taking place in the pipeline. And that's in order to get executive sponsoring you and your program. You need to, on an ongoing basis, communicate to the decision makers, the people with the funding and the resources, where you are with your pipeline. How many ideas you have here, how many incubations, how many funded experiments, and how many are on their way to production. Later on, we'll also measure revenues or impact on citizen level of satisfaction with service, whatever strategic KPI we aspire to shift. So, as I said, definition, you're using different tools. Coach the presenters. You want to make this something. One of the things when you interact with leaders, it's kind of they're your customers now. You're asking for their time. You're asking for their attention. Later on, you will ask for their money. Make sure they enjoy it. You know, we would pass satisfaction surveys to our executives after every meeting. We talked about this. We would have our executive team sitting in a room looking at 3 or 4 ideas every quarter. So I would ask them at the end, please rate the level of experience, rate the ideas. Even if ideas are not meant for your business unit, at least tell me if you thought that the presentation was of high quality. Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the overall experience? And we would make sure that they're enjoying it, because I want them to come back. And this is a great opportunity to associate the innovation program as a high-level, professional, high quality, where the experience is always a positive one. Facts versus opinion. Make sure that you tell them things they don't know. Don't quote the industry reports that they read anyway. They know them by heart. They speak about them to customers. It's just a waste of time. Talk to them about what you found. Talk about the experiments. Talk about if a presenter has a special expertise. One of our presenters at the time was very interested in Internet of Things. And he was pitching an idea that was very creative of how to leverage our existing customer base to go into the market of Internet of Things. And he shared his personal passion to this topic of green energy as part of the presentation. Again, we want to make this something that they will enjoy. Tell them things that they don't know. And be very clear about what you're asking for. So especially in the early stages of the program, every time we would start this meeting, I would tell executives, we are going to present to you 3 projects today that were born out of our innovation program. What I'm going to ask you today is not for funding. I already have the funding pre-allocated for experiments. I'm asking you whether this is interesting enough that you would recommend that we run the experiment. This is education. I cannot assume that they know what I'm asking for. If I don't tell them this, I run the risk of them saying, I don't have funding right now, and being negative. Be very clear upfront what you're asking for. Innovation-related decisions must be shared in a transparent way. That's another way of getting executives to support you. The leadership principle here is you want support from above. What better way than make your executives look like superstars? So if a project moves to later stages and you create a video and you incorporate the executive who made the decision in the video, saying, I always knew this would be a success, that person will be your partner for life, right? I understand it sounds, I don't mean to be, it's not a cynical approach. We are people. Executives are people. And yes, they want to do the right thing. We need to help them do the right thing. We want them to see also what's in it for them, besides making their business better. Make it enjoyable. It's great. We send a camera crew, they interview the executives, the video is cool with high tempo music. It's cool. to be part of something like this. So you want to communicate this in a transparent way, because not only does this help your other principle of flow, because you're making the program transparent to the employees, it also helps you with leadership, because you're putting your leaders on a pedestal because of their support of the innovation program. And that's important. And a sponsor is required that is senior enough to remove roadblocks with ease, because there are many, as I said earlier. And the decision-making moments are your key to success number 3. Because the managers with budget and resources, they decide about individual projects. You have to understand, your pipeline as a whole depends on the decisions that are made on the individual projects that run through it. And as innovation managers, your key to success number 3 is taking control of these decision-making moments. Make sure that they are of the highest quality, that they use the language that you want, that managers understand that it's an experiment, and increase the probability that they will go through. Our success rate was 90%. 9 out of 10 ideas that were presented to executives went on to become funded experiments. The way to evaluate yourselves with KPIs: how many projects are presented annually, what percentage of presented projects proceed to the next stage, to what extent do senior leaders openly support innovation activities, and are there dedicated budgets for the purpose of innovation, or is it expected to be handled internally? You better have dedicated budgets. Maybe in the beginning it will be internal, but again, if you want this to be sustainable, you don't want to go around with a tin cup asking for funding every year. So I just want to jump forward real quick. So these are the other 6 principles. So first of all, rate yourself on leadership. And then I would ask you, because I probably don't have the time to talk about each one, but take a picture of this, and I invite you to complete the self-evaluation and then connect the dots in straight lines, and it creates like a snapshot of your current state of innovation. I invite you to send it to me by email. My email address is at the bottom of the page. And I'll be happy to converse with you about your current state if you wish. So, yes, there are 9 principles in total, but to launch, to take the first step, it takes the 3 principles that I focused on today. Start them at a level of 7, and you bought yourself at least 6 months, maybe more. And then you can start working on the other principles as well. One of the reasons that I'm here today is because I feel that innovation as a discipline is at a very young stage right now. In the same way that 30 years ago, universities didn't teach how to be a chief marketing officer, I think that 10, 15 years from today, a chief innovation officer will be a very clear role. I think I shared some of my insights about what that role looks like, and I think it's a little different than what most organizations think today. So I'm trying to contribute my part to the definition of that role and to what kind of disciplines will be taught in academia and in other institutions when teaching how to create innovation managers. And on a more personal note, there was a person who was active on my program that pitched an idea in an event we used to do, like TED events, where people present ideas, and very high quality, a lot of fun. We recorded on video, we shared with the rest of the organization, and that guy had an idea. He was very shy, so the person who was coaching him told me, please look at the video because I really got him out of his shell, and it really was a first experience for that person. It was really exciting to see. And this idea got to the funded experiment and almost got to realization, but eventually we did not build it. He walked away with a lot more self-confidence, and 18 months after the original event, there was another event in his site, and he shared a personal story that time, because sometimes we did not just ideas, but personal stories. And his presentation was consisting of wedding photos, because what he told us was that the experience on the innovation program and the journey that he went through personally gave him confidence to court a woman who he was very interested in, to propose to her. And part of the courtship was showing her the video of him presenting at the innovation event, and she told him, wow, innovation makes you sexy. And jokes aside, I was sitting there, I was teared up because I realized when I set off to this journey, my personal journey, I was focused on the projects. I was focused on the revenue streams that we will generate for the company. But what I realized was an amazing side effect, and that is an unprecedented platform of employee empowerment. And that's one of the reasons I'm promoting this, because I believe that it will make companies of today a much better place of employment, much better place to work, which I wish to my children to work in. So I thank you, and I hope you find this useful. Thank you. One last thing. Still, don't peddle your book too much. So I have a book. It has all the principles in it. You're invited to look it up. It's in Amazon.